The BYU Cougars and Kansas Jayhawks renew acquaintances after their meeting a year ago. Was the first ever Big 12 game for the BYU football program. What has changed in the time since? Well, I can tell you this much. Kansas makes its first ever visit to Provo, Utah. We're talking about all of it on a Locked On crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Jayhawks.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, host of Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Also joined by Derek Johnson of Locked On Jayhawks for this Locked On Cougars and Locked On Jayhawks crossover edition. Hope you all are doing well, and thank you for being everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, use the promo code Locked On College, and get $20 off your first purchase. Derek Johnson, I want to start with this. The Kansas Jayhawks are making their first ever visit in football to Provo, Utah. Are Jayhawk fans ready for the elevation? And we're saying sub 40-degree temperatures late at night on Saturday night.
That's going to certainly make it tough because last year Kansas had to go up into Reno. It was a little earlier in the season. I think that was week 3 of the season, but similar situation where they played at like a 9:30 kickoff. You're playing on the road in altitude on a different time zone than you're at. And Kansas won that game, but Nevada was a 2-win team last year and they only won that game by 7. And that was a 9-win Kansas team. So clearly it had some sort of impact on them. Now, maybe there was the additive of you were looking over the opponent in that one too, whereas that clearly won't happen in this one because BYU comes in as the top 10 team in the country and the best team in the Big 12. But yeah, those are real worries for I think KU coming into this game that had me circling this one even before the season started, even when we didn't know BYU was going to be this good. Yeah. It still had me thinking this was going to be one of the more challenging games of the season because of that road environment.
Now, the other thing I was going to ask you is, with regards to Kansas right now, obviously they had a big win this past Saturday. Obviously, impressive performance just top to bottom. And one of the BYU's coaches said they have a coordinator corner show every week that they have their top coordinators go on TV. And he called Kansas the most dangerous 3-6 team in the entire country. Would you agree with that assessment? And kind of give a Cougar fans, from my perspective, just explain what's happened with Kansas, because they have been essentially in every game this year, but have failed to win in a myriad of ways, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, so if you look at it right now, BYU is having this unbelievable season, right? Kansas is obviously not. BYU has gone 5-0 in one-score games. Kansas has gone 0-5 in one-score games. And a lot of times that can be the difference in a great year versus a kind of lousy one. And so you can talk about what makes the difference in one-score games. Sometimes it's coaching. Sometimes it's game management. Sometimes it's, I don't know, maybe you have like a bad quarterback. Maybe you just, bad defense, bad clutch play, like whatever it is. For different teams, there are different reasons. Sometimes it's bad luck. Sometimes it's a combination of a lot of different things. And it's been hard to exactly pinpoint, to be completely honest, because KU has been a team that has led in a lot of these games. Like, I mean, they've had fourth quarter leads in a lot of these situations. Obviously, all these one-score games. I mean, you were up 2 scores on West Virginia with under 4 minutes to go. You lose that game. You were up with 2 minutes to go on Arizona State. They score on a drive where they only passed it once in the final 2 minutes of the game. Like, just weird stuff has happened. The Kansas State game, you fumble the ball late. They kick like a 50-yard field goal, and then they lose the next week to Houston. I don't think it's that crazy to call them the best 3-6 team in the country. Now, whatever that actually means, but like, you go back to last week during the broadcast of the Iowa State game, they showed 2-6 teams at the time that had the best point differential since the year 2000. I don't know if that's just as far back as their database could go, but Kansas was like plus 40 something going into the Iowa State game. Now they're over plus 50 in point differential, even though they're 3-6. The next closest was like 0. So like, you're talking about this being an unbelievable, weird, odd situation to even get them to 3-6. There's a lot of talent on the team. So yeah, they're much better than the record might indicate, even if all the hopes and dreams have come crashing down here in Lawrence.
All right, so Jeff Grimes, obviously familiar to BYU fans. He's been on BYU staff in 2 different stints in his coaching career. He's now the offensive coordinator out there at Kansas. I know there's a lot of fond feelings for him out here in Provo because of what he's done during his time with BYU. Has he gotten on better terms with Kansas fans? Because there was a stretch there, it felt like he was on the outs.
It was a very rocky start. People were calling for him to go, for them to go back to any semblance they could of, last year's offense. It was weird because you talk to people at Baylor, you talk to people at BYU, and Jeff Grimes loves running the football, right? He loves giving it to the running back and stuff. And that was like a real criticism early in the year that they weren't doing it enough. You go back to the Illinois loss in which they had a 1-score loss. They had like a 3rd and 3 when they were winning late. And first down really helps you to maybe get a chance to ice the game or something. You end up throwing the ball downfield instead. And the best player on this team, for my money, is Devin Neal, who has just been an unbelievable running back. He's Kansas's career leader in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. And so it's been kind of a weird dynamic at certain times. You go back to the UNLV loss, too. They had a short situation in a red zone fringe area when they were up by, I think it was 3 points, a chance where a touchdown made it a 2-score game. And instead of running the ball, you throw a receiver screen, which those have been criticized a lot by KU fans because screens have led to all sorts of issues, and they kept running them early in the year, and it loses like 5-6 yards instead of just running the ball and keep plowing forward. So that was a bit of an issue. Jalon Daniels didn't look the same, and there was questions about how much of that was the offense, how much of that was him shaking off the rust. But these last 3 or 4 games, everything has synced together a little bit more. Jalen's looked better. So obviously if you have skill talent and the quarterback's playing well, it's going to make the offense look better as well. So yeah, it definitely feels like some of the heat has come off of Jeff Grimes from where it was through the first 3 or 4 games of the season.
Now, Jalon Daniels limited due to injury last year often, and one of the few games he actually played last year was that game in Lawrence against BYU. And I think Cougar fans got, let's say, a rough introduction to what Jalon Daniels could do. But the crazy thing about this, you look at this offense for Kansas: Daniel Highshaw, Devin Neal, obviously at running back, aforementioned Jalon Daniels, Luke Grimm. A lot of the pieces that beat up BYU in Lawrence a season ago are back for this one. So how much better are they offensively despite the lackluster record?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'd be curious to know your kind of take going back to that game last year, because it ended up being, you look at the score, it looks kind of just like a ho-hum win for Kansas that certainly wasn't a blowout, but certainly didn't look to be like this closest game in the world. But it also took Kansas to have 2 defensive touchdowns in the game. You had the Kobe Bryant big hit early. You had the Kenny Logan tipped ball. It felt like the KU offense played better than maybe they scored in the game. Obviously, the first drive of the game, they drove down. You're going to pile up yards, and then they didn't get the 4th down. But yeah, I find that very interesting in this one. And obviously, BYU's defense has been, just taking it to another level in what they've been so far this season. So I'd be curious, like when you view that matchup last year, how much were you in the post game in the moment going, yeah, this was one that they easily could have won if not for some self-inflicted mistakes?
So I made the trip to Lawrence, and I was, by the way, very pleased to find out that Lawrence is actually quite hilly. I did not expect that, first off. By the way,
KU Cavs. That's what they say, all the students. KU Cavs going up and down the hills. Yeah.
Fully believe that. I had a great time, by the way. The people in Lawrence were absolutely remarkable. I will make the trip back as soon as possible. Let's just put it that way. But I sat in the press box that day and watched that game play out, Derek, and I'm not going to lie. I know that the score makes it look like it was a close game. You mentioned the 2 defensive touchdowns, but I think that hit Kobe Bryant when he lit Parker Kingston up and took that ball back for a touchdown. BYU essentially was rattled, and it never really felt like they recovered in that game. Like I said, the score makes it look a lot closer than I believe it actually was. I just feel like the Cougars were in scramble mode essentially the rest of the game, trying to find anything they could, and they made it a respectable score. But I really never felt like, okay, that one was one that quote unquote got away from the Cougars.
Well, certainly I know KU fans are going to be happy Isaac Rex graduated.
Sure. Well, I can tell you this much. Isaac Rex may have graduated, but BYU maybe has replaced him with 3 guys who can attack at that tight end spot. But more importantly, BYU's got 2 really bona fide wide receivers as well, and Darius Lassiter and Chase Roberts, who really picked up the slack of what Isaac Rex left in his wake. So we'll see what happens. Now, we do need to talk more about some personnel, and we'll get to those in just a moment. I got an interesting question for you about the defense from Kansas in particular, and we'll delve into that momentarily as you roll on with this crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Jayhawks. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys to have some fun this NFL season. The best part is you can tackle all the action with FanDuel as they are America's #1 sportsbook. You want to put some Skittles in the college game on this one this weekend? You can do that as well. Right now, new customers, you can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The best part is the FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to make and place your bets live, if I can say that right, on the NFL or any other sport you're interested in, all in one place. So when you get the hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place those bets. That's the incredible part about it. You're not going to be out of date or out of touch with what's actually going on when you place that wager. So get started once again with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. It's as simple as that. It's FanDuel.com to learn more now. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Jayhawks your first view and or listen of the day. All right, Derek. So with regards to the lineups in this game, I've already referred to Jalon Daniels and the two-headed monster of Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw in the backfield for the Jayhawks. But I've really been intrigued by their defense. Give me a sense, because Lance Leipold came in, and I got to give him massive credit for resurrecting Kansas's football program. Literally, it felt like from the dead. It's like that. It's that meme of the Undertaker, like sitting up out of the casket, because he's been really impressive at how he's re-energized this program. But I've been intrigued with their defense. So give me a sense. What's been different on defense for the Jayhawks so far this year?
Well, so they've had some games where they've blitzed a little bit more than we're used to seeing. Typically, the defensive coordinator, Brian Borland, has a more passive approach, more of the kind of, bend but not break type of approach. We'll see if that's what they do in this game. I don't know if it's been something that's been more matchup dependent from game to game, because it hasn't been every game. That's been one thing. The other part of it, they do have really good depth at the defensive tackle spot. They've been rotating those guys. They've get a lot of flash plays from those players this year. They've got two good linebackers when healthy. Cornell Wheeler, unfortunately, wasn't healthy for a couple weeks and missed some key games, and he's been really a difference maker for how good the defense has played or hasn't when he's been off the field. But him and J.B. Brown have been two solid linebackers, and then those two corners, Mello Dotson and Kobe Bryant, are just absolute playmakers. Now, at times, going back to the idea that sometimes they play a little bit too passive for my liking, and I don't think it's always to the benefit of the personnel, because you have these two corners that I think are going to be, maybe late round draft picks or something in the NFL next year with Kobe Bryant and Mello Dotson, to where I think it'd behoove you more to let those guys just try to win on the outside. And that doesn't always happen, but still you have those two playmakers that do come up with big interceptions, pick sixes. Obviously saw that in the game last year with the knockover hit from Kobe Bryant. And so it's an interesting unit that has the biggest struggles when they've played teams that can really throw the football around the field. Like, they couldn't get off the field against TCU outside of just turnovers that were kind of maybe bad throws, or the occasional, one that was forced here or there. So those have been the teams that have really hurt them the most, I would say. Also, scrambling quarterbacks. And that's been a thing that ever since Lance Leipold's taken over, it must be something with the scheme of the defense. If your quarterback can run, they're going to have a good game. I mean, we have FanDuel here in the area. Typically, you take the over on the quarterback's rushing total, and you end up on top.
Okay. Well, let's put it this way. BYU's defense this year, the one key weakness, literally every game, running quarterback. Jalon Daniels might be the best of the bunch that BYU faces in that department. So it could be, a bunch of scrambling between Jake Retzlaff and Jalon Daniels, and see who comes out on top, I suppose.
Yeah, and I'm curious, because when I look at this BYU team, like, I see a lot of familiar faces. Obviously, Roberts and Lassiter are both good players from a year ago, but when I saw them losing Kingsley and Rex and coming into the season, I expected them to actually be better than they were a year ago, just from another year being in the Big 12, getting familiarized. But I didn't expect, obviously, this. A lot of people didn't. So
Nope.
what has led to this different? Like, why are they so much better? Obviously, the defense looks so much better. Jake Retzlaff has been awesome. But, like, can you explain what has led to this gigantic turnaround?
Now, there's always the element of luck, because BYU's been very fortunate with some bounces of the ball and the like. They've been a turnover creating machine, speaking of the defense. But the bigger thing for me, Derek, is this was a program when they joined the Big 12, they felt like they needed to get an injection of talent. So they hit the transfer portal hard. And I believe going into last season, they had turned over the roster to the point of like 2% of the roster was new to the team last year. And I think all of that newness, all of the new bodies in the program there was a gelling period that needed to take place, and it didn't really ever, I think, officially take hold. So they kind of reversed course with this past offseason and essentially said, okay, we're going to bet on continuity here. Yes, we understand what it takes to compete in the Big 12 now that we've been through an entire campaign. So that helped. But they bet on the guys that were already in the program, said, okay, we're going to get them in the weight room. We're going to work on skill development. We're just going to bet on continuity. And I'm telling you, I think that has made the biggest difference is the fact that the guys that were in the building knew that that's who they had around them and that they essentially all went to work. And yeah, they've been fortunate because they've had some close calls, none bigger than this past weekend against their rival Utah, but they have been a very, very cohesive unit. And that term complementary football is really in vogue right now in college football, but I'm telling you, BYU, they embody it as well as any program in the country currently.
Yeah, I mean, I look at like LJ Martin, dude was averaging 3.5 yards a carry last year. Now he's getting 5-6 yards a pop right now. And I just feel like everything has been better for BYU. So like, it's hard for me to pinpoint from the outside. Oh, it's just this one thing. It's just like everything is better. Now on the defensive end of the ball, I see those 16 interceptions, which leads the Big 12. And that was an issue for Jalon Daniels early in the year. Interceptions galore. Last 3-4 weeks, he's been a lot better at it. Obviously beyond that though, the BYU defense has been really good, specifically against the pass. They're top 2 or 3 in the conference when you look at yards per play, passing yards per play, all that sort of stuff. But they are, I think, only 12th in the Big 12 in rushing yards per play or yards per rush allowed right now. Is that like a real weakness right now? Is that something you'd be worried about coming into this game? And how do you kind of size up what works well for the defense, what they've kind of struggled with?
No, it is a concern because star running backs and Devin Neal, for my money, is one of the best, if not the best in the conference. Didn't he just he's now the all-time leading rusher in Kansas history? So congrats to him. That's really cool. The history of Kansas football to break in some of those records. That's impressive stuff. But bigger point to be made. BYU does struggle against the run, especially QB run game. Jalon Daniels should be licking his chops, quite frankly, looking at this BYU defense, because there are times they just don't account for the quarterback in the defensive scheme. And if they get outside the pocket, all of a sudden they've got a lot of green grass in front of them, and they can exploit that. Other thing that I'm concerned about is the BYU, with regards to their defense, is third down defense. I don't care if it's 3rd and 3, 3rd and 6, 3rd and a mile, Derek. Somehow, some way, BYU has given up conversions on third downs of all varieties this season. Have done it with regularity. So if Kansas fans think they're backed up, it's a 3rd and 15, like, oh man, we're going to punt this ball away. Yeah, don't get up to go get that drink right away. Just wait and see what happens, because it's been a key weakness for BYU. And Jay Hill, the defensive coordinator, he's acknowledged it. He said, we've tried different schemes. We've thought about philosophy, what we want to do differently. They haven't found the right answer for that. So yeah, rushing yards, particularly, like I said, the QB run game has affected BYU to a large degree this year. And then just third down defense as a whole, just getting off the field, it's been a glaring issue for this BYU defense.
This might not make you feel better, but Kansas is 6th in 3rd plus 4th down success rate so far this season.
Great. That makes me feel so warm and fuzzy right now. Oh, yeah, no.
But I do actually think this is going to be a good game either way about it. Now, on the offensive side of the ball for BYU, like, has there been any issues for Jake Retzlaff? Like, when does he typically find himself in trouble, or when does the offense, stall out a little bit more?
If you want to see kind of the comparison to Jake Retzlaff when he's off his game, watch the 3rd quarter of this BYU Utah game from this past weekend. He was misfiring on throws, not finding his guys, and very nearly got himself in trouble. And he's had a penchant at times during his career at BYU for being a turnover machine. He was 1-to-1-to-1 ratio last year at one point during his 4 starts for BYU in terms of his touchdown to fumble to interception ratio. 1-to-1-to-1. That's not a good ratio for any of you who are not necessarily football people out there. This year he's been better at that. There have been games where he struggled early this season with some interception concerns, and he still will throw a ball every now and again. He had one against Utah when they were trying to rally late in that game that he got away with that probably should have been picked off. So if Kansas, as you mentioned, the guys like Kobe Bryant and Mello Dotson, they get a chance, they got to make him pay for it, because that happens. It can change how he approaches the game. Is that at times he can get a little bit rattled, seem like he's a little jumpy in the pocket, and that's when teams seem to overwhelm him a little bit. And like I said, the 3rd quarter against Utah is probably the best indication of when he's off his game. But then conversely, watch the 4th quarter when he came on. Yes, he got away with one late in that game in the 4th quarter, but most of the 4th quarter, he was actually really, really good slinging the football.
Well, and I obviously can't not mention Darius Lassiter because that is a name that goes down in Kansas lore. Obviously, their dad, Kwame Lassiter, was a stud safety for KU. The older brother was a really good receiver for KU. The next brother in line was a corner on last year's team. He's since graduated. So I guess basically what I'm saying is, can you have Darius Lassiter come play for KU this game? I think that might help this end of things.
So we talked with him during media availability earlier this week, and he talked about the fact that he always thought he was going to end up playing for Kansas.
Wow.
And it's crazy how things work out. And he gave us approval. I guess somebody asked him a question. Can we call this the Lassiter Bowl? He's like, yeah, absolutely. Call it the Lassiter Bowl. Why not? He's got his family connections to that university and that football program are very, very strong. And you could also tell he was asked the question about losing to his brother last year in that game in Lawrence. So his brother still brings it up, and it just it eats at him every single day. So he wants some payback against the Jayhawks. And obviously his brother's not on the team, so he doesn't get to have that family connection, but he wants to pull one over on Kansas. There's no doubt.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see who the brothers are rooting for in this game, right? Do you root for the brother now that you're not on the team? It'd be interesting.
He did say his brothers are all in with the Cougars right now. Now,
Okay.
is that him just talking, or is that legitimately that they're repping the wife? Speaking of BYU, that I don't know, but he did say that his brothers are all behind him now. So take that for what it's worth, KU fans. But it'll be fun. I can tell you he's going to have a little extra juice in this one. And I would expect that you're going to see number 5 playing well, at least in theory, on the field on Saturday night. So we'll see what happens on that front. All right, Derek, we're going to finish up this crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Jayhawks momentarily. Get some predictions, keys to the game, and the like. We'll do that momentarily right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, Game Time is here for you guys. If you want to get out to the games you're interested in, like this one this Saturday night, if you want to go to Lavelle Edwards Stadium, Game Time can help you do that. But more importantly, if you want to go to other events, whether it's theater, comedy, or music, concerts, they've got all the options for you guys. They have a fantastic new feature in their app called Game Time Picks, which makes getting all the tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier, and also the other events you may be interested in. It filters out all the fluff to give you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time sorting through thousands of tickets to find the right option for you. The best part is also with the Game Time app, they've got their all-in pricing feature. You toggle it, tells you exactly what you're going to pay up front without any surprise fees being added on. You also can see where your seat views, a panoramic view to see what you're expected to see when you get to the event you're going to buy tickets for. The best part is you can take the guesswork out of buying your tickets and do it with Game Time Picks today. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Jayhawks your first view and or listen right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And obviously a big thank you to all of you for being everydayers with us here. All right, Derek. So looking at this one on Saturday night, it's going to be a late night for Kansas fans. It's a 9:15, and that's if it actually, kicks off on time. It could slide to as late as 9:30 Central Time. And it's a late night for all KU fans. Give me a sense, first off, are Kansas fans happy to have this conference expanded as widely as it has? And that also may include them in the future, most likely playing some of these late night contests.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of excitement and happiness from the idea of, especially when Texas and Oklahoma left, you didn't really know what was going to happen with the Big 12. And so finding more stability with some other schools coming in, I think has, added to the value of the league. I think it's made the basketball side of things, which obviously, KU fans care about a lot, even more intense because BYU is really good at basketball and they seem to be investing a ton of money into it. In addition to that right now, and then you add Arizona and some of these other schools. So yeah, I think KU fans are definitely in favor of it. I definitely think, and I don't know, maybe this is just playing into your fan base a little bit here. I definitely think this isn't just a KU fan base perspective. I think some people have gotten a little bit annoyed with the team that you guys just beat last Saturday based on how they've kind of approached entering into this, but all is good and all is love, I think, from BYU entering and some of these other schools.
Now, I know we're doing football here, but the basketball side of things, I can tell you that Kansas ticket, when Kansas makes that trip to the Marriott Center coming up later this winter, it may be the hottest ticket in Provo. I'm not even joking right now.
Wow. See, that's one where it 100% bucket list, especially because of basketball. And I guess it works now with football being in November. You come out, you get up to the slopes, maybe you go skiing, maybe you do something. Had an uncle who went up to some yurt and had like a nice dinner up there or something like that. I don't know. It all sounds fun to me.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, like the basketball side of things, and you and I will talk ahead of that matchup between the Jayhawks and the Cougars, and that'll be a fun one. But the basketball side of it, yeah, that's always there, especially with the rise of BYU basketball. There's no doubt about it. All right, so I'll give mine second. So I'm going to ask you, if Kansas is going to pull off this upset and knock off the now number 6 ranked BYU Cougars, what do they need to do Saturday night?
So I hate even like going into, win the turnover battle, because that is such like an obvious thing you could say every game, right? But it is true when you have a BYU team that is, has 16 interceptions, most of the Big 12. They actually came in last week tied with Iowa State, both at 14. Kansas didn't have any against Iowa State, and they won the game. So that's kind of the first and foremost. You can't go on the road against a better team and expect to lose the turnover battle and win this game. In fact, they probably need to get 1 or 2 back themselves, similar to what they kind of did last year. But the other one besides that, and I guess I could talk about like establishing the run and running the football and all that stuff is important if you're KU. But I think it's just play smart football and avoid the little like game management stuff that we've kind of criticized this team here on Locked On Jayhawks over the course of the season for, whether it's misusing a timeout here or there or not going for a 4th down you should have. I mean, people were pulling their hair out last week. The first drive of the game, you go down, you're an underdog to Iowa State. You run the ball for 15 yards on 1st down against an Iowa State team that came in 15th of 16 teams in the Big 12 in rushing defense. And then you don't give Devin Neal another carry. You end up with 3rd and 11. You run the ball on 3rd and 11, pick up 7 yards. It's 4th and 4 at like the plus 40, and you punt it. And it's like those things that will drive you mad. Kansas is last in the Big 12 right now in 4th down attempts. You have to be aggressive in this game. You were an underdog on the road playing against an undefeated team. So I would say it's finding that balance between being aggressive, going forward on 4th downs, playing smart, and not turning the football over. Can you find that proper balance to win a game like this?
All right, so my keys to the game. Jeff Grimes has institutional knowledge of BYU. He actually helped essentially orchestrate and build the offense that Aaron Roderick still runs to this day. Now, there are wrinkles because they essentially run the same offense, for lack of a better term, but there are wrinkles from both of them. I expect a few more wrinkles than usual from BYU this week to hopefully throw off Grimes just a little bit, because I can tell you, there are still like signals and calls that BYU has on their sideline that Jeff Grimes probably could look across the field and be like, yeah, I know what they're calling, guys. So I think that they may shake that up just a little bit, and they're going to obviously have to counter that institutional knowledge. Now, vice versa, BYU has institutional knowledge of how Jeff Grimes operates. Now, they also faced off against Lance Leipold and Kansas, so that'll help a little bit. The other thing I'm looking at here in this one, Derek, is BYU has to avoid the disastrous play. Remember, last year, Kobe Bryant made one of the more spectacular hits and fumble returns for a touchdown that I have seen in college football in quite some time, and essentially forced BYU onto their heels, and they never got back on the front foot, to use that expression, in that game in Lawrence a season ago. You got to avoid that locally, here locally on Saturday night, because that happens, it could be another one of those games where you're playing catch up the rest of the way. And that's a disaster waiting to happen for BYU, especially when you're going to have the home faithful behind you and all that. Because I can tell you right now, things in Provo, they're at a fever pitch with the Cougars knocking on the door of the top 5, the Big 12 championship game. Like the dreams of Cougar fans, like we're talking the biggest dreams they could have had before the season have all come true, Derek, and they don't want to see it slip right now.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the beauty of the Big 12. And all these teams are going to come in each and every year, moving forward next year and be like, well, maybe we can be the BYU next year. So it is a really cool thing happening. And obviously, I know which side I'm hoping comes out on top this weekend. But I think moving forward, I do appreciate what you guys have been doing in the conference. And it's been really cool to see. In a lot of ways, I think a lot of KU fans are jealous because they're sitting there going, man, this is the season that some people projected us to have, that we could be in those shoes. So I think at the end of the day, if you're looking for predictions, I saw right now on FanDuel here locally, the spread is 3.5 points. I actually do think it's going to be a close game, but that's where the problem comes for me. If I am having to pick a team who comes on top, BYU wins close games. Kansas does not. So I guess right now I would be taking BYU in a close one, 27-24.
Okay. Well, you're kind of right in the same realm I'm at. I had it BYU 31, Kansas 27. So I do think these are two offenses that can get after one another, but more importantly, like I said, the institutional knowledge that these two staffs have of one another, it can play a pivotal role in all of this. But Derek, where can everybody find your fine work if Cougar fans want to check you out?
Locked On Jayhawks. You can give me a follow on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at D Johnson Radio.
All right. Obviously, vice versa for Kansas fans. If you want my thoughts on all things BYU, check out Locked On Cougars, wherever you get your podcasts, also on YouTube. If you're watching this, you can find both of those shows. And if you want to follow Locked On Cougars, we're on Facebook, Instagram, or X/Twitter at Locked On Cougars. And then you can find me personally at Jacob C. Hatch. Derek, thanks as always, man. Let's do this again when Hoops gets back together. All right.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
All right, that's Derek Johnson. I'm Jake Hatch. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Jayhawks and Locked On Cougars your first listen and or view of the day. And as always, thank you for making both of these fine podcasts a part of your day. And thank you for being everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.